you know, as we start talking about as we talk about social emotional learning supports, a really central piece of having a good systemic social emotional learning program for your school, your district, is really to have collaboration and input with families and communities. Also from a personal standpoint, what I would share is that working at different schools, when we have that parent collaboration and that parent support, that turns good schools into great schools. So I just want to thank you for all of your support, and thank you for allowing me to speak today. I'm going to go ahead and try and share my screen. I am not on my typical device. My typical device was not working, but as we're learning to adapt and overcome, hopefully this will work. And I think I am not able to share. Maybe I need to be a co-host, or I'm wondering if Jessica or Julie could share their screen. Let me see. It does not look like I could share that presentation currently. Let me see if this works.
Okay, no problem. I can, if you just give me 1 second, I can pull up the slides. This is why we were ready in case this happened, right? So
yes,
we will. Give me 1 second here.
You can try again as well. You are now a co-host, John, if you want to try.
Thank you. Oh, let's see. Let's give it another.
There you go.
Perfect. All right, so I will share my screen. And can you see the PowerPoint now, or the slides now? I guess it's not a PowerPoint.
No, we're seeing the event screen.
All right, let's try. How about now? That should work.
There we go.
All right. Okay. And again, this has been a year of adapting. So we'll continue in that theme. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I'm a school veteran. It's been 20 plus years in Arizona. It's my 8th year in Paradise Valley. I've been lucky enough to be a school psychologist in Paradise Valley at Pinnacle Peak and also Shadow Mountain. And I'm also a board certified behavior analyst. That was sort of a mid-career retooling. And I was really fortunate the last few years to be part of our special education support team. And I was able to work with some of our self-contained programming for students with more significant emotional and behavior difficulties, and also do a lot of work with school teams that embraced PBIS, positive behavior interventions and supports. Which is a lot of overlap with social emotional.
I'm just going to interrupt you 1 second. There's some beeping going on. Do you hear it on your end?
I do not hear any beeping.
Interesting. Okay.
Do you want to try sharing your screen, Jessica? We'll switch.
John, you keep going, and while you're going, I will pull up your slides on my end.
Perfect. So I will stop sharing. Okay, so I don't see those slides, but let's just get started. So, you know, my position is new in the school district, and we've also hired 27 people into new positions as social emotional learning specialists. So we're all kind of getting started during this, what is a very interesting time, but also a really critical time for our students. Perfect, thank you. And if you would move to the next slide. So what is social emotional learning? I'm going to use the definition here from the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. CASEL is their name. And they've been around since the 90s, and they're really the dominant organization for researching, supporting social emotional learning. As a school district, we've been using their definitions and their competencies, one, because I think they're the best, but also another relevant factor would be that Arizona Department of Education over the summer also adopted their model of their competencies, and that you can have some links to that at the end of this presentation. So what is SEL? It's the process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. We'll look at this in a graphic format in a minute so you can get a look at those competencies. But an important piece here that I like to highlight too is this is a process through which children and adults acquire and apply this knowledge. So one thing that we really want to emphasize is that social emotional learning is really a lifelong process. It doesn't just happen at some developmental stage as children. It's something that happens for adults as well. And that might be something we can all relate to right now. I've certainly had to grow some new skills over the last 6 months as we sort of coped with this global pandemic. And it's an important consideration as well, because as we'll talk about later, addressing adult social emotional learning skills is really important for us as a school district as we look to promote this for our students at school sites. And if you could move to the next one, Jessica, please. Thank you. So the 5 SEL core competencies, and I've color-coded them because they sort of go together. There's one that's about self-awareness, and that sort of goes together with self-management. There's social awareness, and that also sort of goes with relationship skills. We need to be socially aware of what is maybe happening with others so we can develop those good relationship skills and react to those in the moment. And then a really big important one too is promoting responsible decision making. In the next slide, we'll look at a little more detail. So if we look at self-awareness, there's a few skills under that competency. And one might be identifying emotions, another one accurate self-perception, recognizing strengths, developing self-confidence and self-efficacy. And as I mentioned, we talk about how this can really develop through the lifespan. And some of the examples we'll look at later of what lessons, SEL lessons can look like in the classroom when we talk about that first one there, identifying emotions. That's going to look really different for our primary grades and our preschool students than what it's going to look like for our high school students. But there's growth that happens all the time. With our really young kids, we're maybe identifying basic emotions, happy, sad, things like that. Once we get to the high school level, we might be linking to literature and being able to describe why characters in a story or a novel have mixed emotions about a particular situation. So this is a really helpful graphic as we start thinking about how we can program for teaching some of these social emotional skills under each of these competencies. Thank you. If you could move on to the next one, Jessica. All right, so the other piece here is why. And we're going to talk more about what it looks like in practice, what SEL can look like in practice. But the why, the rationale, I think is really important. So this first one here, and this is a really a big landmark study, a meta-analysis where they looked at, you can see here, 213 studies. So this is powerful research once we get to that meta-analysis level. So the positives, the things that grew in students that we really care about, increases in social emotional skills, improved attitudes about self, others, and school, more positive behavior in the classroom. And I love this one, 11 percentile point average gain on standardized achievement tests. So not just talking about the social emotional skills, not just talking about the behaviors, we're also seeing when we can promote SEL skills in students that can result in better academic achievement as well. On the right side, we see decreased risk for conduct problems and emotional distress, Pretty good results. If you go to the next one, similar. This is another study, a little more recent that came out, and there's many studies on SEL, but these are a couple good ones. Looking at the long-lasting impacts. And when they started to look longitudinally, and they looked at different SEL programs inside and outside the United States, and they looked, I would love if they looked a little longer, but they looked at 6 months to 18 years. Well, 18 years is pretty long. The benefits, and they found that the benefits were lasting. Sometimes programs that we do maybe have short-term benefits, or they're specific to the measures that we do at the time, but they found that there were durable gains, The academic performance, SEL skills, positive attitudes, positive social behaviors, and then lower conduct problems, lower rates of emotional distress, and also lowered drug use. Some of the other research really looks at rates of incarceration, juvenile delinquency, and finds some really promising results there as well. If you could move to the next one, please. This is an important piece. And I include this because there's some positive impacts on teachers. I find that it's really relevant because nationally we're facing some teacher shortages. Here in Arizona, we're certainly facing some teacher shortages. When we help adults develop, or teachers develop, or school administrators, or all educators develop emotional competencies, they're more likely to stay in the classroom. And I just think that's a really important piece. And it helps sort of develop better nurturing relationships with students, helps teachers manage behavior better in their classrooms, serve as behavior role models for their children. Some of the emerging research on SEL really surrounds that modeling of SEL skills in the classroom setting, and that there's really, really powerful benefits to that as well. And it helps us regulate our own emotions. There's some stress around education at this time, so developing those skills can be really powerful. If you would move to the next one. And so another rationale, another why, is when the folks study this, they find a great return on investment. So they're finding that investing early in social emotional learnings can have a 11-to-1 benefit ratio. And that's savings from not having to do interventions later. So this really speaks to me too. This is really powerful and speaks to that upfront investment that we should have some return for. The other piece I'll say, the district, I think, has made a really big commitment to SEL. And part of that came from feedback from teachers as well. And when we've surveyed teachers, we find that our professional association, our professional learning department, find that some of their concerns really are not about academics. They're really about behavior in the classroom and social emotional needs in the classroom. So that's a local rationale, I think, of why the district was willing to make such a big commitment to SEL moving forward. And I'm just really grateful that we did. The district did not know that we were going to face a global pandemic, so I'm very happy that we at least have some more resources at this time. And if you would move to the next slide, please. Looking at our time. I want to leave time for questions. So school-wide SEL. It's really important that we think about a systemic approach. And we know that when we do a systemic school-wide approach, preferably a district approach as well, that we're going to have better outcomes, more enduring programs, and more enduring outcomes. So when we look at the systemic approach, we talk about infusing social emotional learning into every part of the student's educational experience, all classrooms, all parts of the school day. People that are really mature with their SEL programs start reaching to out of school time as well. What are those before and after school programs? Some folks, community education programs, community centers, boys and girls clubs, that sort of thing. Really important to have partnerships with families and communities. This involves cultivating caring, participatory, equitable learning environments and using evidence-based practices. I'll repeat that one, evidence-based practices. I'll say that's something that myself and our other SEL specialists that we brought on board, that's a really big piece for us. We don't want to do things just because they sound nice or because they were cute on Pinterest. No disrespect to Pinterest, but we want to look for the evidence base. We want to make sure that that what we're spending our time and our energy and our money on is going to be really effective. And then we also want to build in some systems to make sure that our local approach, our local interventions are really effective as well. And if you would move to the next one. So this might be a helpful graphic. On the right side, you can look at all of the approaches that might fall into a systemic school-wide implementation of SEL. So that top one looks at explicit SEL instruction. Now, some of our, and I'll say some of our schools in Paradise Valley are a little further down the SEL path than others. Some schools have had SEL programs and very explicit SEL instruction. Other schools are now investigating, are starting to provide some of that SEL instruction and really just sort of evaluating what other efforts they want to bring in. Another popular approach under that SEL instruction is integrating SEL concepts within academic instruction. That really looks like we want to teach the skill, and then we want to look for opportunities for students to practice it or to link it to the other academic content that they're receiving. That's another really powerful way to promote SEL in the classroom. Youth voice and engagement is a big one. A lot of times I really sort of pair that with supportive school and classroom climates. You know, we want to have classrooms where students have some choice, where they are able to have some input into maybe it's how we name things, or you know, what we do for classroom jobs. We really want to look for that collaboration. The next one being that focus on adult SEL. I can tell you that that is now been a focus of our professional development department, and they're creating some great things, and our teachers are eating it up. And it is a very, very timely topic, because I think we can all relate to having some difficulties at this time. Supportive discipline, that's a big one for me, you know, when we look at traditional discipline practices, are they educational? Are they instructional? Are they getting a change in behavior? And I can say that Paradise Valley Unified School District has made a commitment to restorative practices, which I think are a much better approach than our traditional discipline as well. I see some questions, but I can't quite see what they are. I'm wondering if we can do questions towards the end. Would that be okay, Jessica?
Yeah, Don, and I'll absolutely help relay the questions.
Okay.
Presentation, no problem.
Well, we could do one now, or we could wait. I'm flexible.
Well, this question, it is sort of related to your last slide where you spoke about making sure that you're implementing evidence-based practices. And so the question is, do you have an example of what an evidence-based practice using SEL would be in the classroom?
Absolutely. So we're going to look here in a few slides. And again, CASEL has program guides, and they're really good. They're well researched. So they look at those tier 1 programs, which we'll talk about a little bit. That would be a great example of an evidence-based tier 1 approach. And then we'll talk about some of the other stuff as well. What we know is evidence-based at tier 2 and tier 3. But I'll try and make sure I circle back to that. That's a big topic for me. I'm happy to talk about that. A lot of my peers are probably tired of me talking about the evidence base. So the other pieces here, continuum of integrated supports, which we're going to talk about a little bit, and we'll talk about the primary prevention pyramid, and then, you know, authentic family partnerships that are culturally responsive. That's an important piece, aligned with community partnerships, and then systems for continuous improvement. So if you look at the left side, we go back to that one slide, you see that it's got that wheel, 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are CASEL's recommended 4 areas of focus if you want to work towards systemic school-wide or district-wide implementation. I can say as a district, you know, we continue to build awareness. We've done a great job of building awareness around trauma-informed practices. We're really moving to build more awareness around social-emotional learning practices. Again, number 2, we're really working right now on strengthening adult SEL, and we've really jumped in. Again, some schools have been doing more explicit SEL instruction for students, but other schools are really moving in that direction as well. So if you could move to the next one. So when I talk about systemic, this is really the primary prevention model, the 3-tiered. You may have seen this in public health. If you're familiar with school structures, you've probably seen it with either positive behavior intervention supports or RTI, response to intervention. A lot of times we're starting to put all of those systems together, and we talk about multi-tiered systems of support. The logic here is that we want to have a really strong tier 1. And this is this research-based core instruction, which we're going to talk about a little bit more. But tier 1 is what all students get. So at the school-wide level, what level of SEL instruction do all students get? And when we do well with tier 1 instruction in SEL, we have fewer students who need tier 2 supports. Tier 2 supports we might call for some students. Some students need a little extra. And I'll talk about this the same way we would think about reading or math instruction, right? If I gave you the standard reading instruction in a classroom, but you were still having difficulty, I want to move you quickly to get a little bit more, right? You might be seeing the reading specialist. We might break out into small reading groups. We want to have the same logic here for social emotional learning and behavior skills. And we want to catch kids at tier 2. When we catch kids at tier 2 and we give them extra instruction and support, they're less likely to move up to tier 3. Tier 3 is for your very few kids, and this is really intensive intervention. And you know, we know that if a student rises to a level of tier 3, it's hard to give them a level of instruction that brings them back down to tier 2. Possible in a lot of cases, but it's difficult. So the logic being here is we really want to keep our eyes on tier 1, make sure we have really quality tier 1 social emotional learning instruction, so kids don't rise to tier 2 or rise to tier 3. If you can move to the next slide. This gets more into what does SEL look like in practice. So, and these would be evidence-based. These are some of the evidence-based pieces of SEL programs that CASEL's research has really highlighted. So activities that we would do at tier 1. Number 1, freestanding lessons. These are explicit lessons, step-by-step instructions to teach students social and emotional competencies across the 5 core clusters. And I'll share some examples of those in a little bit of what that might look like at the different age levels. The second one might be general teaching practices. These are practices that create classroom and school-wide conditions that facilitate and support social emotional development in students. This is the supportive classroom practices and really effective teaching practices surrounding classroom management and opportunities for collaboration. We move to the next one. The third one would be integration of skill instruction and practices. So this is when we start embedding SEL content with academic curriculum. We know that just giving you get some benefit from having one explicit lesson. You get more benefit if we then pair that with opportunities to practice that skill or relate it to your academic instruction. That can just be very helpful. And the last one here is just guidance to, this is a tier 1 strategy, guidance to administrators, school leaders on how to create policies and organizational structures just to support that social emotional development as a school-wide initiative. And a lot of times this involves more of that supportive discipline practice as well. If you can move to the next one. So this is just in the bottom is a screenshot. The CASEL organization, they have some really good guides on what are effective tier 1 SEL programs. And this is something a lot of our schools have been looking at now. And then they look at these different, they look at characterizations of your students, the study design, and then what are the outcomes, right? Did this program result in improved academic performance, increased positive social behavior, reduced conduct problems, reduced emotional distress? So we really kind of want to look for programs that sort of check those boxes, but that are also a good fit for our student population. So that's one place where we find that evidence base really, really coming into play. If you move to the next one. So what can things look like at tier 2? And we're going to come back to tier 1. I've just got some lesson plan examples that I think will be helpful. So tier 2, this is some students. And I'm so happy that we have our SEL professionals, because they've really been jumping in not only to help teachers with tier 1, supplement tier 1, model tier 1, they've also been jumping in to really support some of our tier 2 students during this time of distancing. But there's 2 broad approaches, and this really comes out of the evidence base. People that study this quite in depth. Things we know that are evidence-based and tend to be effective, have good effect sizes at tier 2. 2 broad approaches, problem-solving approaches. And these are usually for students that have performance deficits. That means they might know what to do. They might not know when to do it, but they know the skill. Or they might not be properly motivated to do the skill, or they might not know how to perform this skill in certain environments. If the skill is known but it's lacking, we use this problem-solving approach, right? Problem identification, we analyze it, right? Come up with why. We come up with a plan that we think can help this student and then we want to evaluate it. So sometimes this can result just in some simple accommodations or a really light behavior support plan. The other broad approach, and this is more for students with acquisition deficits. They haven't learned this skill yet, right? They just don't know it yet. Those are typically small group approaches, and they're usually step-by-step instructional interventions. A lot of times they're scripted. A lot of those tier 1 SEL programs then have a tier 2 layer, and they more practice on that skill. It can be really powerful if a whole campus is working on, let's say, some self-management skills, but I know I have students who need some extra instruction. They might get pulled, and we might, in a small group, give them that extra instruction pretty close to the time when they've already had it at tier 1 in the classroom. But these are usually, right, we sort of like behavior skills training. You know, we tell a student how to do it, we model them, we have them do it, we have them do it more practice, and then we sort of monitor and see if it's been effective. If you move on to the next one, please. So tier 3, this is few students. And most time, depending on the models you look at, when we think about that pyramid, this few students might be 1 to maybe 5%, depending on your student population, that need really more intensive and highly individualized supports. A lot of times we're doing a functional behavior assessment at this time because there's a competing behavior, right? There's some other challenging behavior that is getting the student's needs met. And so if that's the case, we need to look at it and look at what are those needs and how do we program a more appropriate social skill for them. Typically, there's more intervention time per week, and the interventions last longer. We do more frequent progress monitoring. And if you move to the next one. These interventions are pretty much provided by professionals with specialized training. Performance deficits are often addressed with replacement behavior training. And acquisition deficits are often addressed with instructional approaches. What differs from tier 2 is, you might have a small group that's, maybe 5 to 8 students for a tier 2 approach. These students have much more severe needs. You might, when you're teaching them new skills, you might be doing it 1 to 3 students at a time. So, these are really intensive interventions. And there's part of the logic of why we want to really keep our eye on tier 1 and tier 2 and make sure those are really strong. One of the difficulties that schools can get into, and I've certainly worked at schools that have struggled with this issue, is that we spend a lot of time with our tier 3 students, and we neglect some of those tier 2 or tier 1 needs. And that can really eat up your resources and time quickly. You could move to the next one, please. So when we're talking about this, this presentation, we also who helps facilitate SEL instruction and supports. So school-wide SEL is really a team process. And in that, we really need input from all the stakeholders within the school setting. We need input from families. We need input from students. And often, if we can, we want input from community entities and other service providers who are interacting with our families, or some that provide services on our campuses. But when we talk about delivering the actual services, tier 1 is typically provided with SEL instruction in the classroom. And that's typically delivered by the classroom teacher with professional development. One mistake that I think some districts can get into is, hey, here's this new content, you just go teach it. Well, when we haven't given professional development and we haven't really addressed the SEL needs of adults, that can become problematic. So we've got to be a little careful about making sure that we're giving our teachers the tools. And right now, some of our schools are doing a little more of that tier 1 instruction, and in a lot of places, our SEL specialists are assisting with that or supplementing. Tier 2 supports are typically provided by people like SEL specialists or our school social workers, school counselors, school psychologists, or special educators if it's a special education student. One thing that I'm really happy about now, all of our schools in PV have at least some time from a school psychologist, an SEL specialist, and special educators. Some of our title schools might have more professionals as well. So a little more of what SEL looks like. So and these are, I pulled just some examples from solid SEL lessons. So at preschool, we might teach, right, an SEL lesson might look like teaching students to identify happy, sad, and angry feelings using puppets, right? That might be developmentally appropriate. Discussion of what events cause those feelings, right? So a lot of self-awareness. And then self-management, we talk about techniques to calm down and problem solve after conflicts, right? Stop and breathe strategies, say how you feel and why, let other people say how they feel, and that sort of thing. I love this one, decide together what you can do, right? So a little conflict resolution there. If you can move to the next one. So getting a little developmentally older. Elementary lessons might look like we've increased the complexity of those self-awareness feelings. Labeling feelings like pleasant, happy, irritated, or angry. We might start teaching strategies for managing stress or anxiety, deep breathing or yoga. I think this is one that we should be focusing on right now, and I know a lot of our SELs are at our different school sites. We might read stories and discuss the perspective and feelings of others, right? We're getting into that, being a little more aware of others and relationship skills. Activities that require students to work together to achieve common goals. So now you're moving from teaching it to really, I want you to show me how these skills, or practice those skills. And then I can't quite see the other one. Learning and practicing steps to solve interpersonal problems. And you could see how that would be a little more developmentally appropriate than what we talked about for the preschool. If we move to the next one, middle high school. The vocabulary around emotions might get more complex, right? And we might start discussing things like mixed emotion scenarios. A lot of times they might teach practical strategies for handling strong emotions. Deep breathing, mental rehearsal, muscle relaxation, visualization, that sort of thing. Teaching goal setting and motivational techniques. Activities to strengthen interpersonal skills, or really focusing on specific social skills, right? If they can identify that there's specific social skills needs for that school site, that's something you could do, and move into teaching conflict resolution. So those are just some examples of what things can look like at those different developmental levels. And I'm going to move into the last thing when I was talking with Julie about what we might want to cover is, what does SEL support look like during distancing or our virtual education? And I do want to say this is going to vary by school site based on what the needs are of that community, and also what resources that school site has. But we've had a really big focus on connections. Really trying to keep students connected to school, and if we can, keep students connected to each other. So we've had a big focus on re-engagement activities and making personal contacts with families, but a big focus on a welcoming virtual classroom environment, building relationships, creating a sense of community, promoting regular check-ins. For SEL lessons, I think at all of our schools now, there's at least, at our younger grades, K-8, there's at least some weekly lesson content going on. That would probably look a little different if it's a school that was a little further down the SEL road than others. And for our high school students, they've been looking more at monthly lessons at this time. But I can tell you that through my conversations, there is a whole lot of schools, if they didn't have an SEL curriculum, boy, they're really researching right now, and we've been having some great conversations. So other things happening during distancing. The direction of our district leadership, all of our schools now have an interim social emotional support team. And right now, we're really trying to triage and understand the needs of our families, our students, and our teachers. So all of our schools were given some well-being checklists. And this is really just signs to watch out for, and we created them to be developmentally appropriate across our age span, but really trying to help teachers identify when students may be in emotional distress. We have a referral process that's been developed at each site. And again, Jessica got to be part of that, as well as Lori Berman over the summer as we worked on this, and the idea that We want multiple ways for families, teachers, students to identify if they need some support, or even to share if they have a friend they think needs some support. Every school has a point person for those SE wellness teams to coordinate that referral information. And we've been using that referral information. We're learning a little bit more about what the needs are of our families, our students, our teachers. And then there's ongoing support for students and teachers in need. A lot of times, right, when we get that referral information, it might be just a problem-solving approach. Maybe students just having difficulty with some facet of online learning, or we have a family that's in need. We've been for students who are having difficulty, a lot of times we're doing more frequent contacts or check-ins with that student, more frequent support, reaching out. And then we've had a lot of small group supports too. Most of those have been run by our new SEL specialists, and they sort of keep adapting, and they're watching what's coming in through this referral process, and then trying to create opportunities. And I can tell you that one of the big concerns we've had is concerns for a lack of socialization, some loneliness during this time for our students. So at a lot of our schools, students that have been identified with those needs, we're trying to create social groups for them, facilitated by some of our specialists. Should we move to the next one? So looking ahead to SEL supports for physical reopening. We're really looking at that information that's been collected from our families, our teachers, and our students. We'll be continuing to have SEL instruction in the classroom. We'll be continuing to implement small group skill building lessons. That's an important part, skill building. I want to emphasize that. SEL instruction is really about skill building. It's not really about what you might think of as counseling or mental health type therapy. It's about identifying skills that our students need to improve on and trying to get them that early in the process. We want to catch them and build their skills. We'll continue the problem solving approaches in lighter intervention plans. I think we're going to see a lot of that for our students when we're back. Individualized support plans is needed. Again, I'm really proud of our teams for collecting a lot of information and meeting on a regular basis and sort of planning for who is going to need some extra support. And then again, when we get back, there'll definitely be some intensive skill instruction for students who need that as well. And if we could move to the next one, a few resources, a few from CASEL. There's a couple videos that I think are good overviews. There's one in English, there's one in Spanish. There's a link there for what SEL can look like in homes and communities. A word of caution on CASEL. They have so many resources. I speak the language and I get on there and I go down the rabbit hole. I can't tell you how many hours on the CASEL website this summer. So be prepared. CASEL has a lot. It may be best to search something specific if you want to find it in CASEL, because you could be in Wonderland pretty quickly. The other link that I think is important here is Arizona's Department of Education. Again, they over the summer have decided to adopt CASEL's competencies, and they are building out a number of supports there. It's not so overwhelming with their website, so that might be a helpful piece as well. And so next, moving into questions, and also just thank you, really appreciate the parent support. It just makes a huge difference. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, John. I think that was I know it was a huge task to kind of like give the SEL 101, and also what are we doing, and also what will it look like? And I know that was a big task, and I think I so appreciate all of the information today. I think it was really helpful. Go ahead.
Do we want to field some questions? Should I take a look at?
Absolutely. And Julie, I don't know if you're able to see the chat or if you're able to help out. I think right now I'm seeing a couple of questions. One that I'm seeing is, do we have an idea of where our district is currently on the SEL scale? Do we have a lot of tier 2 needs right now? Do you have an idea of where we are in that assessment?
So again, I think every school is going to vary a little bit but I'm gonna say I'm of the opinion that I guarantee we have a lot of tier 2 needs. And I think it was maybe a bit of a hole for us as a district, is maybe we didn't have enough people power to address tier 2. So my personal opinion would be, before even COVID and distancing, I think we had a need for tier 2 support. And I think we're going to have a big need for tier 2 support. Some of the specific concerns that we're hearing, and I'll tell you, is so I'm asking our professionals for sort of reports from those teams, right? They're collecting the information. The biggest one that I'm hearing is students having difficulty with engagement or motivation with online instruction. The second one that's really big is concerns for socialization. And I think we're going to have kids who have missed out on social opportunities, right? And that's really going to vary by family too. But so yes, we definitely have those tier 2 needs. That said, boy, we've got to start by addressing that layer of tier 1 in the classroom, and then grabbing students who need a little extra support. Yeah. Am I available to do a 30-minute presentation at a PTO meeting?
Jessica, you're muted.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, no, I didn't mean to interrupt. Before, I just want to make sure because I responded to something and I just wanted to make sure that I gave the appropriate response in our chat box. There was a question about access to the current SEL plans. And I know I received an SEL slideshow that was presented to students in my kiddos class from our principal. So seems the principal would be probably a good point of contact if you have questions about those lesson plans that are happening with your student. I just want to make sure I gave the correct answer.
Yeah, I think asking the school would be appropriate. Right now, most of our K-6 sites have adopted. They've got an SEL Tier 1 program that has lessons. The big ones that we're seeing, Sanford Harmony is a program that's very popular. All Things EQ is another one that's popular, and there's a few other options. School sites that haven't yet adopted. There's maybe some reason to sort of go slow with that right now, to make sure that we're giving some opportunities for professional development for students. But most of our K-6 sites have something. And then that's less common at our middle school and high school, but there's a lot of conversations at those levels about bringing something in.
Thank you. Okay, and I think we have a question here. Go right ahead.
Oh, is that for me? You can give a thumbs up if you.
Yes, go right ahead. I know you were in the middle of responding to something, so I didn't want to cut you off.
Am I available to do a 30-minute presentation at a PTO meeting? Yes. I would love to support those PTOs. As my schedule allows, 30 minutes sounds reasonable, and I would love to engage.
I love that. That's awesome. And I also just want to let everybody know, there was an earlier point in time where UPC put out a survey where we were trying to just get some feedback to see if like a just sort of informal community check-in where parents and staff could come together and kind of talk through things. Some of the challenges that we're seeing, share advice, share stories, and Mr. Bowen has so graciously offered to kind of help us navigate through some of those conversations. And so we will also be setting up a date sometimes in the near future where anyone in the community can come and join us, and we will be able to even pick Jon's brain some more and learn even more. So thank you again for that. Look for details about that coming soon. There's a question here about will every school have an SEL website? This particular parent has a middle school student and noticed that the middle school has one, but the elementary school does not. So is that sort of the goal? Will they all have their own website, or will that maybe just kind of depend, like you said, on where each site is?
Right now, I'm not aware of any sort of a district mandate or expectation to have a website. Some do. Some of our SEL specialists have created their own sites or their Bitmoji classrooms as well. But I think that's really at this point going to be site by site. Yeah.
So they could certainly. I mean, that might be something too. You could just ask your principal, right? Like, kind of that's something that they're working on or not. Because that definitely seems like that might vary. Here's a question about what percentage of schools or classrooms are actively implementing the Tier 1 practices, and do teachers have like an opt-in for training on this? And then there's another question, but I'll let you ask those two, and then I'll ask the follow-up.
So what percentage? I'm going to go out on a limb and say at K-6, I'm going to say it's a very high percentage. And that my understanding is that all classrooms have some time built into their current schedules or distance schedules for that tier 1 instruction. That said, not everyone has a comprehensive tier 1 program yet. So it might be kind of some lessons here, lessons there, but maybe not a sequenced program through one of these tier 1s. Yeah.
And then, so what high school classes would expect to see some SEL lessons shared? Like, where would those lessons come in?
So that will be a little site by site of where they want to program that into their schedule. But I have had some great conversations with high school teachers that are integrating that with their curriculum. So it could be that maybe there's a weekly lesson that happens in one of the classrooms, but then they're also embedding. And English language arts is just a fantastic place to embed SEL content. I have a friend who's a teacher who's teaching film, and they're like really collaborative groups. So it's all about hey, let's make sure that we're collaborating effectively. Then we're linking some of those emotions. And so at the high school level, I think that would be there's multiple places, and it just depends on the schedule. Yeah.
How do you become an SEL specialist?
So very interesting. So there's not a specific degree, but the criteria for us to be in our district to be an SEL specialist is that you have to be a master's level professional, and that you have to have a sort of related degree, and that might be social work, that might be counseling, that might be school psychology, that could be that you're a master's level teacher with a background in behavior or social emotional learning. So that's our current criteria. But there's not a specific degree program for that right now, or there's not a certification or a licensure for SEL in Arizona.
Got it. How can you help a student, from a parent point of view, and what can parents do at home while students are doing online schooling?
So it depends what they need help with, but I'll throw out a few things. In what I'm hearing from parents or advising parents to be successful, I think a schedule is really important. We love schedules where students can see that they're crossing things off. A really big piece I think we're hearing is opportunities for regulation, for self-regulation, whether that's movement breaks that we've built in, or whether that's mindful minutes or other calming activities, like thinking about not waiting till we are really struggling, but hey, let's implement that. Students that have difficulty being still, giving them access to movement, or prompting them to do some movement activities before sitting down in front of the computer. I think that could be really important. Another piece could be setting really small goals. There's something that's really rewarding, or I'm not really up to speed on all the brain science, but there's some brain science about releasing some of the endorphins like dopamine, about setting a small goal and achieving it. And that also helps our own self-efficacy. So I think small goals are really important. I think any opportunities that we can find for socialization, and right now, it's a little hard because so much is online. And I have this discussion with parents and friends that are parents, like, there's social interaction, but it's all through games and online. I think keeping up that social, and I've listened to my friends' kids kind of have these, and they're having the same sort of discussions of learning how to, disagree or settle a dispute. They're doing it online. So, right, do I love that, we're spending that much time online? Not really. But I think looking for those opportunities for social engagement is really important. Those are, a few things that come to mind, but, more specific difficulty, I might be able to give you some better answers on that.
Well, so I just will say that makes me feel so much better, because I hear my third grader resolving a lot of conflicts during his online video games. So maybe that's good emotional growth. I don't know. There's a lot of conflicts that happen there while he's playing with his friends.
But I think that would be the same thing if we were outside playing and there was a disagreement. That's part of that developmental process. So I do think that that's important. Yeah.
That's really interesting. There is a question here about, so speaking to, again, some of these challenges with being online and students not being as actively involved in lessons as they probably would be in person. This parent's middle schooler says that 90% or more of the students do keep their cameras off during this school day, and they really aren't involved except for answering questions in the chat box. Is there a way that, that you're helping teachers to get their students more engaged and involved? And also that seems key to SEL, and just want to share with you that Lynn says she loves all of this and thank you so much for sharing. So.
Oh, thank you, Lynn. So one of the things, whether we're in-person education or online education, one of the things we know that is really helpful for student engagement, actually adults too, is opportunities to respond. So when some of the things we've been talking with teachers about is the higher rate of responses you expect from students, whether that is a comment in the chat box or, holding up a number of fingers or, something like that. The more frequent we have those opportunities to respond, the higher our engagement is. And we haven't really studied it so much online, but we know that's really effective in person. The other thing we've talked about as an SEL professionals group too, and to advise teachers is, sometimes calling on students and sometimes doing it in a random fashion. In the classroom, like a really popular one with teachers would be like popsicle sticks. And you've got a little cup of popsicle sticks with everyone's name on it, and like, oh, I don't know who I'm going to call. Boy, that really brings that engagement. But and I do think, and I've watched some of the classroom interactions that are happening and some of what people have developed, and I do see our teachers really moving towards and really innovating, learning on the fly how to make things a little more engaging. But it's definitely not optimal to be just virtual. Yeah.
Question here. How do you help students stay involved when school is harder without the motivation?
Yeah, so I'll go back to that and say short-term goals. So, think about what works for motivation for you, and I'll share. And my wife's a psychologist too, so we behavior ourselves all the time, and it's setting like a little goal. And then what are you going to do after? And so we call this PREMAC principle, or the if then. So maybe highlighting, okay, what do you want to do when you're done with this? And having them, maybe even write out for them, or have them write out, 1, 2, 3 things that we're going to accomplish. Then we're going to do something fun. But I think the short goals is really what we want to look at. The other piece, we talked about pre-planned breaks too. Getting in movement or calming or other relaxation activities. The other one I want to throw out there is, for some students, we may need to teach them to request that, right? Or teach them that they can do that if things are becoming overwhelming or too boring. What can you do? You can get up and move. Yeah, some ideas that might help.
Thank you. And I don't know if this is a good idea or a bad idea, but I have a little treasure box that I got off Amazon that's filled with all kind of fidgety kind of toys that I know my kid would get really excited about using in the classroom that we didn't really have here. And so I'll kind of be like, okay, if we can get through Zern, you get to pick out of the treasure box. And it is, for us so far, it has worked as a really good motivator. So I've learned from the school and the practices that I know they were doing, and I've tried to the best extent that I possibly can bring them into my house a little bit.
I think that's completely appropriate. Sometimes we get some people, there's some attitudes maybe around reinforcement, and I hate the word rewards because that's a little more loaded. But the thing is, we all work for reinforcement. We work for other reasons too. But and I love my job and I value it. But at some point, if the checks stopped coming, I would have to go do something else. We all sort of work for that reinforcement. And I think if we can kind of structure that, that's just fine, and maybe it's just, right. And maybe it is with the fidgets of okay, hey, we did this, this, and this. 3 minutes with a fidget. Which one do you want? Right? That's motivating. I think that's okay. Right. And I also feel like, you know, the virtual instruction, it's our least bad option right now. And hopefully it won't last too much longer, but I feel like we sort of got to do what we can do to kind of get through it and keep learning happening and keeping, you know, any of the connections we can to school and peers and these adults at school, I think is really important.
Thank you. That's so helpful. So we're just about at time. So I'm just going to pass it over to Julie, and thank you both so much for everything you did to make this a successful and I think really informative presentation today.
Thank you all. It was my pleasure.
Thank you so much. I know I got a ton of great information out of this, and I know everyone else did as well. I can tell by the comments and all the great questions and feedback that we're getting already. So I really appreciate, Mr. Bowen, all the time that you put into preparing the presentation. A lot of work I know went into putting those slides together and really trying to focus on covering all the different, many topics and issues that we asked you to cover for us. So I really appreciate that. I wanted to remind everyone a couple of things that we do have these forms. If you can print that out and fill it out at your school, going back to your principal is the best way you can find out if you have a website, who the exact names of people are, if there's a referral form, or what people can do to get the information, so you can help spread that information and communicate that to the families in your community at your school. And also, if you can fill out the form with the survey, I did add a part on there. If there was a question that you have or you think of in the next few days that you didn't get a chance to ask today, there's a place where you can put that there, and we can try to find that information for you or give you the information who to contact to get that question answered. So we really appreciate all of you being here. I can tell that almost everyone stayed on for this wonderful detailed presentation, so that's fantastic. It's great to see so many engaged parents really participating and wanting to get this information and supporting what we're doing, and we're here trying to support what you're doing. So I just want to say thank you all for being here. If you have questions, definitely you can email me, programming@pvupc.org. I'll try to get the information to you that you're looking for. And I see a question came in, so I'm going to pass it back to Jessica to wrap up with the last comments, but just thanks once again, and have a great week, everyone.
Thank you, Julie. I think I'm unmuted. Hera, do you want to unmute? Are you referring to we have the Wine UPC fundraiser, or I just want to make sure you're maybe not talking about the virtual vendor showcase? I just want to clarify. Or you can type if you're not able to unmute. Oh, okay. So I just want to clarify which one you're talking about. I'm watching the chat box. So if you're talking about the wine fundraiser, we have details on our Facebook page and in the newsletter that went out. Okay, thank you. And essentially, we will be donating any funds that we get through that link to PVSchools Education Foundation. And from there, they have great communication with our principals. And the goal is we really want to try to support sites that do not have parent groups. So it's wonderful how parent groups have been really involved and providing different, even PPE at some sites, masks at their sites for staff and students, and cleaning supplies and all kinds of things.